My name is Michael Dawson. I'm 51 years old, and for 22 years I was the senior pastor of Covenant Church in Phoenix, Arizona. Last fall, my heart stopped for 7 minutes during a routine surgery, and in those 7 minutes, Jesus showed me the one sin that's sending millions of Christians, good, faithful, church-going believers, straight to hell every hour. It wasn't what I expected. It wasn't what I preached. And when I came back, I had to burn down everything I'd built to tell the truth. I grew up in ministry. My father was a Southern Baptist pastor in rural Oklahoma, and Sunday wasn't just a day, it was the day. We had Sunday school at 9, worship at 10:30, potluck at noon, and evening service at 6. Wednesdays meant prayer meeting. Saturdays meant visiting shut-ins. Our house smelled like coffee and hymnals, and our dinner conversations revolved around scripture and salvation. I gave my life to Christ at 7 during a revival meeting. I felt the call to preach at 15. By 18, I was enrolled at Southwestern Seminary in Fort Worth, Texas, convinced that God had chosen me to shepherd His people. I wasn't arrogant about it, at least I didn't think I was. I was earnest, passionate, hungry to know God and make Him known. I met Jennifer during my junior year. She played piano for chapel and had a quiet strength that steadied my intensity. We married a week after graduation, moved to Phoenix for my first associate pastor position, and began building what we thought was a God-honoring life. 3 years later, Covenant Church offered me the senior pastor role. I was 29, young and ambitious, ready to grow a ministry that would honor God and reach the lost. And we did grow. When I arrived, Covenant had 180 members meeting in a building that smelled like old carpet and needed paint. 22 years later, we had over 2,800 members, a new worship center with state-of-the-art sound, a thriving youth ministry, and a missions program that supported workers in 11 countries. People drove from across the valley to hear me preach. My sermons were posted online, shared widely, quoted in small group studies. I wrote 2 books on church leadership. I spoke at conferences. I was by every measurable standard a successful pastor. But there were cracks no one could see. Not even me most of the time. The first crack was pride disguised as confidence. I loved being needed. Loved the way people looked to me for answers, for wisdom, for spiritual direction. I told myself it was about serving God, but if I'm honest, it was about being respected. I measured my worth by attendance numbers and baptism counts. When another church in the area grew faster than ours, I felt threatened. When a younger pastor's sermon went viral, I felt jealous. I never said these things out loud. I prayed about them, confessed them in private, but I never actually dealt with them. I just buried them under more ministry activity. The second crack was control. I wanted Covenant to run my way, follow my vision, reflect my leadership. I said it was about maintaining doctrinal purity and missional focus, but really, it was about keeping power. When elders questioned my decisions, I smiled and listened, then did what I wanted anyway. When staff members suggested different approaches, I praised their initiative and then overruled them. I wasn't a tyrant. I was too smart for that. But I was a manipulator, using spiritual language to get my way. I've been praying about this, and I sense the Lord leading us in this direction. Who could argue with that? The third crack was apathy disguised as wisdom. Over the years, I'd learned to keep people at arm's length. Early in my ministry, I'd poured myself into individuals, investing deeply in their lives, weeping with them, celebrating with them. But it was exhausting, and some of them disappointed me, fell back into sin, left the church, criticized my leadership. So I developed what I called healthy boundaries. I stopped doing hospital visits unless it was a major crisis. I delegated counseling to other staff. I kept my office door closed more often than open. I told myself it was about sustainability, about not burning out. Really, it was about not caring as much. Jennifer saw it. "You're becoming distant," she said one night after I'd skipped dinner to prepare Sunday's sermon. "From me, from the kids, from the people you're supposed to be serving." I dismissed her concern. "I'm building something here, Jen. Something that will outlast us, that requires sacrifice." She didn't argue, but I saw the sadness in her eyes. Our marriage wasn't bad, we didn't fight much, we still went on date nights, we prayed together, but it had become functional rather than intimate. We were ministry partners more than we were lovers. Our kids, Nathan and Bethany, grew up in the church. They were pastors' kids, PKs, which meant everyone watched them, expected them to be examples, criticized them when they weren't. Nathan rebelled quietly. Going through the motions at church while living a double life his youth pastor eventually discovered, Bethany became a perfectionist, desperate to meet everyone's expectations, terrified of disappointing God or me. I preached about grace every Sunday, but my kids learned performance, and I didn't notice because I was too busy building my ministry. Last fall, I started having chest pains. I ignored them at first. Too busy, too many commitments. Jennifer finally insisted I see a doctor. Tests revealed I had significant blockages in 2 arteries. "You need surgery," the cardiologist said. "Soon." We scheduled it for mid-October, right after our annual missions conference. I wasn't worried. I was 51, relatively healthy, surrounded by prayer. God had called me to lead Covenant, and I wasn't done yet. The morning of surgery, Jennifer kissed me in pre-op. "I love you," she said, her voice tight with fear. "I love you too," I replied, squeezing her hand. "I'll see you in a few hours." The anesthesiologist asked me to count backward from 10. I made it to 7. Then I was standing in a place that wasn't the hospital. It wasn't anywhere I recognized. The space around me was vast, neither dark nor light, but something in between, like twilight that never resolves. I felt exposed, not physically, but spiritually. Every mask I'd ever worn was gone. Every pretense had been stripped. I stood there naked in a way that had nothing to do with clothes. I heard footsteps, slow, deliberate, coming from somewhere I couldn't identify. Then he appeared. Jesus. Not the gentle shepherd from Sunday school flannel boards, but the risen king I'd preached about but never truly expected to meet. His presence was overwhelming. Holy, fierce, compassionate, and terrifying all at once. His eyes held eternity. And when he looked at me, I felt the weight of every sermon I'd preached, every decision I'd made, every motive I'd hidden. I fell to my knees. Not out of religious habit, but because standing felt impossible in the presence of such holiness. "Lord," I whispered, and the word felt heavier than any I'd spoken in 22 years of preaching. "Michael," he said, and my name in his mouth carried both love and judgment. "You called me Lord with your lips, but your heart served another master." Before I could protest, before I could list my accomplishments or defend my ministry, he lifted his hand. The space around us changed, and I saw something that would destroy every assumption I'd held about salvation and ministry. I saw millions of people, believers, Christians, church members. They were worshiping, serving, preaching, teaching. They looked faithful. They looked saved. But as I watched, the ground beneath them began to crack. One by one, they were falling. Not into fire, but into an emptiness that felt worse, a void where God's presence should have been, but wasn't. "Why?" I cried out. "They're your people. They believe in you." Jesus turned his gaze from the vision to me, and his sadness was deeper than any ocean. "They believed in me," he said, "but they never truly knew me. They served their own kingdoms while using my name." Then he showed me closer. I could see into hearts as they fell. A pastor who'd built a megachurch but hadn't truly loved a single sheep. A worship leader whose songs praised God but whose heart craved applause. A Bible study teacher who knew scripture but didn't know the author. Missionaries who'd gone to the ends of the earth but had never surrendered their pride. And then I saw myself. I saw the moments I'd chosen my reputation over a person's need. The times I'd preached grace but lived by control. The staff meetings where I'd manipulated outcomes while claiming to seek God's will. The counseling sessions I'd rushed through because I had more important things to do. The way I'd built an empire and called it a church. I watched myself stand in the pulpit, Bible open, speaking truth, but my heart was far from the God I claimed to serve. I was building my kingdom, not his, and I'd been so good at it that I'd fooled everyone, including myself. "This is the sin," Jesus said, his voice cutting through my horror, "that sends millions of Christians to hell every hour. Not the sins they confess and repent of, but the sin they don't see. Loving themselves more than they love me, serving their own glory while claiming to serve mine. The sin of using my name to build kingdoms I never blessed." The vision faded. The vast space returned, and Jesus stood before me, waiting for my response. I had none. No defense, no excuse. Just the terrible recognition that I'd spent 22 years building something impressive while missing the one thing that mattered. Knowing him, truly knowing him, and loving others the way he loved them. "Lord," I finally said, my voice breaking, "I thought I was serving you." His eyes held mine, and I saw both sorrow and love in them. "You were serving the idea of me," he said. You loved the applause that came from using my name more than you loved me. You built a ministry, but you never built intimacy." He gestured and another scene unfolded. I watched myself in the prayer closet of my office, a small room I'd designed specifically for seeking God. I saw myself enter at 5:30 a.m., Bible and journal in hand. But instead of kneeling, instead of waiting in silence, I immediately opened my planner. I prayed through my sermon outline, asking God to bless the 3 points I'd already decided on. I prayed for the building campaign, asking God to provide the funds I'd already calculated. I prayed for the staff, listing names and asking God to help them support my vision. Then I checked my watch, wrote a few sentences in my journal about being faithful, and left. "I was praying," I protested weakly. "You were reporting," Jesus said. "You came to me with plans already made, asking me to bless what you'd decided, not to guide what I desired. You called it prayer. I called it performance." He showed me another scene. A young couple sitting in my office, their marriage in crisis. I remembered them, Brian and Angela Torres. She'd discovered his emotional affair with a coworker. They were broken, desperate, looking to me for hope. I watched myself from the outside now, and I was horrified by what I saw. I gave them 20 minutes. I prayed a quick prayer, handed them a book on marriage, and referred them to our counseling ministry. "I'm praying for you both," I'd said with a warm smile as I ushered them out so I could make my next appointment. "Did you pray for them?" Jesus asked. I searched my memory. I couldn't remember a single time after that meeting when I'd actually interceded for Brian and Angela. "I meant to," I whispered. "You meant to," he repeated, and the words felt like stones. "Michael, they needed a shepherd. You gave them a system." He showed me more. A dozen scenes, maybe more. Mrs. Henderson, the elderly widow who'd called my office 3 times asking if I could visit her husband in hospice. I'd sent the associate pastor, Kyle Morrison, the teenager struggling with suicidal thoughts, who'd reached out for counsel. I'd forwarded his email to the youth pastor, the Martinez family whose daughter had been in a terrible accident. I'd shown up at the hospital for 10 minutes, prayed briefly, and left to prepare for Sunday's sermon. "I delegated," I said, trying to defend myself. "I had others on staff who could help. I can't do everything." "You didn't delegate," Jesus said gently but firmly. "You abdicated. You gave them programs when they needed presence. You offered systems when they needed you. You became too important to love people." The words cut deeper than any physical pain, because they were true. Somewhere along the way, I'd convinced myself that growing the church was the same as loving the church, that increasing attendance was the same as increasing disciples, that building programs equaled building people. Jesus showed me one more scene, and this one broke me completely. It was Sunday morning, right before I was about to preach. I was in my office going over my notes one last time. There was a knock at the door. My assistant opened it and said, "Pastor, Tom Richards is here. He says it's urgent." I glanced at the clock. 10 minutes until service. Tom was one of our longtime members, a good man, faithful volunteer. "Tell him I'll catch up with him after service," I'd said, not even looking up from my notes. Jesus paused the scene. "Do you remember what Tom needed?" I didn't. I couldn't even remember if I'd followed up with him after service. Shame flooded through me. He'd been diagnosed with cancer 2 days earlier, Jesus said quietly. He was terrified. He came to you because he needed his pastor to pray with him, to speak life and hope over him before he told his family. You sent him away because your sermon was more important than his soul. I wept. Not the controlled tears I'd cried during emotional altar calls, but deep broken sobs that came from the core of who I was. "I'm sorry," I said. "I'm so sorry. I didn't know. I didn't see." "You didn't want to see," Jesus said, not unkindly. "You wanted to be a successful pastor more than you wanted to be a faithful shepherd. You wanted to be known more than you wanted to know people. And worst of all, you wanted to be loved more than you wanted to love." He let me cry. There was no rush, no impatience. He simply waited, letting the truth sink into the deepest parts of my soul. Finally, when I could speak again, I asked the question that terrified me most. "Am I going to hell?" He looked at me with an expression I'll never forget, grief mixed with mercy. "That depends," he said. "On what?" I asked desperately. "On whether you want me, or just what I can give you," he answered. "Heaven isn't a reward for good ministry. It's union with me, and hell isn't punishment for bad behavior. It's separation from me. You've been living separated from me for years, Michael. You used my name, quoted my word, built ministries in my honor. But your heart was far from mine. If you die in that state, the separation becomes eternal. But I preached the gospel, I said, grasping for something solid. I baptized people. I sent missionaries. I taught the Bible. You did, he agreed. And many people came to know me genuinely through those ministries. But that doesn't make you right with me. You can point others to a place you've never entered yourself. The horror of that truth settled over me like a weight. I'd spent 22 years leading people to Jesus while drifting away from him myself. I'd become a sign that pointed to a destination I wasn't traveling toward. How did I get here? I asked. How did I go from loving you to loving success in your name? Jesus sat down, or maybe the space adjusted so he was seated, I'm not sure. Slowly, he said, one compromise at a time, one crowd-pleasing sermon instead of a convicting one program that made people comfortable instead of calling them deeper, one decision to protect your reputation instead of speaking hard truth, one moment of choosing numbers over people, activity over intimacy, building your kingdom over surrendering to mine. He showed me my early years of ministry, the hunger I'd once had, the late nights in prayer, the way I'd wept over people's lostness, the times I'd sacrificed comfort for obedience. Then he showed me the gradual shift. Success came, and with it came pride. Attendance grew, and with it came the intoxication of being needed. My books sold, and with them came the belief that I had something special to offer. Slowly, imperceptibly, I'd moved from worshiping God to worshiping ministry, from loving Jesus to loving being a pastor. Can I change? I asked, desperate. Can I go back? Yes, he said, and hope flooded through me. But it will cost you everything. You'll have to lay down the ministry you've built. You'll have to confess to those you've hurt. You'll have to stop performing and start being real. Many won't understand. Some will turn against you. You'll lose influence, possibly your position. Are you willing to pay that price? I thought about Covenant Church, the building we'd just finished, the staff I'd hired, the vision I'd cast for the next 5 years, the reputation I'd built, the books that bore my name, everything I'd spent 22 years creating. If I lose it all but gain you, I said slowly, is it worth it? He smiled then, and it was like sunrise after the longest night. That's the question I've been waiting for you to ask. The answer is yes. I am worth more than everything you think you've built, because nothing you've built will last unless I built it through you, not for you. He stood and extended his hand. I'm sending you back, Michael. Not to return to ministry as usual, but to tear down what you built in your own strength and let me build what I desire through surrender. Will you do it? I took his hand, and warmth flooded through me. Not just physical warmth, but the warmth of being truly known and truly loved for the first time in years. Yes, I said, whatever it costs. Yes. The space around me began to fade. His face stayed clear the longest. Remember, he said, and his voice echoed as I felt myself being pulled backward. Many are called, few are chosen, because few are willing to die to themselves completely. Don't waste this second chance. Then I was gasping, choking on a breathing tube, surrounded by beeping machines and urgent voices in Jennifer's tear-streaked face. He's back, someone said. We've got him. But I knew the truth. He had me. And everything was about to change. Recovery from heart surgery is slow and humbling. For a man who'd spent 2 decades standing in front of crowds, lying helpless in a hospital bed, was its own kind of death. The physical pain was manageable. The spiritual reckoning was not. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the vision Jesus had shown me. Good Christians falling into darkness, not because they'd rejected him, but because they'd replaced him with ministry, with performance, with the appearance of faith without the substance of intimacy. Jennifer sat beside my bed that first night after surgery, holding my hand. You were gone, she said quietly. For 7 minutes, the doctor said. Your heart just stopped during the procedure. They brought you back, but you were gone. I looked at her, really looked at her, and saw the exhaustion in her eyes, the worry lines that had deepened over the years, the way she'd learned to carry burdens alone because I was always too busy building the church. I saw him, I said. Jesus. He showed me the truth about my heart, Jen, and it wasn't good. She squeezed my hand tighter. What did he show you? I told her everything. The vision of millions falling, the scenes from my own ministry, the realization that I'd been serving success instead of serving him. I told her about the people I'd dismissed, the intimacy I'd avoided, the kingdom I'd built for my own glory while using his name. She cried as I spoke, and I knew these weren't tears of surprise. She'd seen it all along. She'd just been too faithful to say it. "What are you going to do?" she asked when I finished. I didn't have a plan yet, but I had a direction. "I have to tell the truth," I said. "I have to resign." Her eyes widened. "Resign? From Covenant?" "I can't keep leading people towards something I've been running away from myself," I said. "Jesus told me I have to tear down what I built in my own strength before he can build what he desires. That starts with stepping down." She was quiet for a long time. Then she said something that broke me open in a new way. "I've been praying for this for 10 years, Mike. Not for you to resign, but for you to see. To really see." "Why didn't you tell me?" I asked. She smiled sadly. "I tried. So many times. But you were convinced you were doing God's work. And maybe you were in some ways. But you weren't with God while you did it." The hospital chaplain visited the next morning. Pastor Reynolds was an older man, semi-retired, who served patients with a gentleness I'd never managed. "I heard you had quite a journey," he said, settling into the chair beside my bed. I gave him the short version. He listened without interrupting. When I finished, he nodded slowly. "Pastor Dawson," he said, "the hardest people to reach with the gospel are the ones who think they already have it. Religious people are often the most lost because they're so convinced they're found." "That was me," I said. "That is you," he corrected gently. Present tense. "You're in process now. The question is whether you'll stay in process or try to fix this with a new program." He was right to challenge me. My instinct, even lying in a hospital bed, was to strategize, to figure out how to manage this revelation, how to communicate it without losing everything, how to maintain some control over the outcome. "How do I stay in process?" I asked. He smiled. "By doing the next right thing without worrying about 5 steps ahead, by being honest when honesty costs you, by loving people when it doesn't benefit you, by staying small when everything in you wants to be big again." Over the next 3 days, I made a list. Not a strategic plan, but a list of people I needed to speak to, wrongs I needed to make right, truths I needed to confess. The list was long and getting longer the more I prayed. First on the list, Tom Richards. I asked Jennifer to find his number and bring me the phone. My hands shook as I dialed. He answered on the 3rd ring. "Tom, it's Pastor Michael. I need to talk to you about something that happened a few months ago." There was a pause. "Okay," he said cautiously. "Do you remember coming to my office right before service? You said it was urgent, and I told you I'd catch up with you after." Silence. Then his voice, quieter. "I remember. I never followed up," I said, my voice breaking. "I forgot. And I just found out, Jesus showed me that you'd been diagnosed with cancer and you needed prayer, and I sent you away because I was focused on my sermon. Tom, I failed you. I'm so sorry." He was quiet for so long I thought the call had dropped. Then I heard him crying softly. "Pastor," he said, "I've carried that hurt for months. I thought I didn't matter to you. I thought the church was more important than people." "It was," I admitted. "To me, it was. And that was sin. I'm asking for your forgiveness." "I forgive you," he said, and I could hear the release in his voice. "How's the cancer?" I asked. "Treatment's going well," he said. "I'm in remission. Can I come visit you when I'm out of the hospital?" I asked. "Not as your pastor, but as your brother. I want to hear your story. I want to pray with you. Really pray, not perform." "I'd like that," he said. After I hung up, I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Lightness. Not the high of a successful sermon, but the deep relief of being honest and being forgiven. I went through the list. I called Brian and Angela Torres. They'd left Covenant 6 months after our brief meeting, and I'd barely noticed. I found their number through Jennifer and called to apologize for giving them a book instead of time, a system instead of care. Angela answered, suspicious at first, then crying. "We needed you," she said. "We were drowning and you handed us a life preserver and walked away." "I know," I said, "and I'm sorry. I don't have the right to ask, but if you'd be willing, I'd like to meet with you both. Not to bring you back to Covenant, but to hear your story and ask forgiveness properly." They agreed, though I could hear the hesitation. I didn't blame them. I'd given them no reason to trust me. I called Mrs. Henderson. Her husband had passed 3 months earlier. I apologized for not visiting him in hospice, for sending someone else when he'd needed his pastor. She was gracious, more gracious than I deserved. "Pastor," she said, "I forgave you a long time ago, but hearing you say it means more than you know." I reached out to Kyle Morrison's parents. Kyle had survived his crisis, but barely, and his family had left the church feeling abandoned. I confessed my failure to them. His mother wept. His father was angry, and I let him be. Some wounds take longer to heal. Over the next 2 weeks, as I recovered physically, I continued the spiritual work of confession and restitution. Some people forgave quickly, others needed time, a few refused to engage, and I had to release them, trusting God with the outcomes I couldn't control. My first Sunday back at Covenant, I wasn't scheduled to preach. The associate pastor had been handling services in my absence, but I asked the elders for 15 minutes at the end of the service. They agreed, assuming I'd give an encouraging testimony about God's faithfulness during surgery. I stood before the congregation I'd led for 22 years, and I told them the truth. I died during surgery, I began, and in those 7 minutes, Jesus showed me that I've been building my own kingdom instead of His. I've been serving success more than I've been serving Him. I've used you, this church, as a platform for my glory, rather than a family to love. I've delegated care when I should have given presence. I've chosen programs over people, attendance over intimacy, reputation over relationship, and I need to ask for your forgiveness. The sanctuary was silent. 2,000 people staring at me, some in shock, some in confusion, some, like Jennifer, crying quietly. Effective immediately, I'm resigning as senior pastor of Covenant Church. I'm not leaving because I'm burnt out or because I have another opportunity. I'm leaving because I can't lead you to a place I've never been. I've been teaching you about Jesus without truly knowing Jesus, and that has to stop. There were gasps, murmurs. An elder in the front row stood, as if to intervene, then sat back down. I don't know what comes next for me, I continued, but I know this. I need to learn how to love God and love people without the platform, without the title, without the applause. I need to become small so He can become big, and I'm asking you to pray for me as I do. I stepped down from the pulpit and walked out the side door, not to make a dramatic exit, but because I didn't trust myself to stay and manage people's reactions. Jennifer found me in the parking lot, leaning against our car, shaking. "You did it," she said, wrapping her arms around me. "I did," I said, "and I have no idea what happens now." "Neither do I," she said, "but for the first time in years I have my husband back." The fallout was immediate and brutal. By Monday morning, my resignation was the talk of Phoenix Christian circles. Some praised my honesty, many questioned my sanity. A few accused me of abandoning the flock. The elders called an emergency meeting without me. The staff was in crisis. Attendance the following Sunday dropped by 30%. People were confused, angry, hurt. I'd disrupted their comfort by exposing my own. Nathan, my son, called 2 days after my resignation. "Dad, what were you thinking?" he asked, his voice tight with frustration. "You just threw away everything. Your career, your reputation, your platform. For what? A vision you had while under anesthesia." I could have gotten defensive. A week ago I would have. Instead, I said, "I'm sorry you're seeing this as loss. I'm seeing it as finding something I'd been missing for years." "What? Humiliation?" he shot back. I took a breath. "No. Honesty. Nathan, I've been performing for so long that I forgot how to be real. And that cost me. It cost our family. It cost my relationship with Jesus. I had to stop." Silence on the other end. Then quieter. "I've been performing too, Dad. My whole life. Trying to be the perfect pastor's kid so I wouldn't embarrass you. I'm exhausted." My throat tightened. "I'm sorry. I didn't know I was teaching you to perform instead of teaching you to live. We're going to figure this out together, okay?" He didn't answer right away, but when he did, his voice was softer. "Okay." Bethany took it differently. She called crying, terrified that my resignation reflected poorly on her, on our family, on God. "People are asking me questions, Dad," she said. "They want to know what you did wrong, if there was a scandal, if you're okay." I don't know what to tell them. "Tell them the truth," I said. "Tell them your dad realized he'd been building his own kingdom and needed to tear it down. Tell them it's messy, but it's honest." "But what if they judge us?" she asked. "They will," I said. "Some already are. But we can't control that. We can only control whether we're living with integrity." Jennifer and I began the hard work of rebuilding our marriage. Not from infidelity or major betrayal, but from years of neglect dressed up as ministry. We started going to counseling, not as a pastor and his wife, but as two broken people trying to find each other again. Our counselor, Dr. Ramirez, asked me a question in our third session that I couldn't answer at first. "Michael, when was the last time you did something for Jennifer that didn't also benefit your ministry or your image?" I stared at him. I couldn't think of a single instance. Every date night had been strategic, networking with donors or key leaders. Every vacation had been tied to a conference. Every kind gesture had been performative. "I don't know," I finally admitted. Jennifer cried. Not angry tears, but grief tears. Mourning what we could have been. "I want to start over," I told her that night. "I want to date you again. Not as Pastor Michael and the pastor's wife, but as Mike and Jen. Two people who fell in love a long time ago and then got lost in the noise." She smiled through tears. "I'd like that." We started small. Walks in the evening with no agenda. Coffee on Saturday mornings where we didn't talk about church or ministry. I learned to ask her about her day and actually listen. I learned that she loved painting but had given it up because there was no time. I bought her supplies and cleared space in the garage for a studio. These were small things, but they were real things. And slowly, the distance between us began to close. Financial reality hit hard. I'd been making a solid salary at Covenant, and now that was gone. We had savings, but not enough to sustain us long term. I needed work. The thought terrified me. Who would hire a 51-year-old ex-pastor who'd resigned in disgrace? I wasn't qualified for much outside ministry. I started applying for jobs, admin positions, sales roles, anything that would pay the bills. Rejection after rejection. Then a friend from seminary, who now ran a non-profit helping the homeless, offered me a position. "It's not glamorous," he said. "You'd be coordinating volunteers, managing donations, probably doing some hands-on work at the shelter. Pay's not great, but if you're serious about learning to serve without a platform, this might be it." I took it. My first day at the Phoenix Hope Center, I showed up in jeans and a t-shirt ready to serve. My supervisor, a woman named Carmen who'd been doing this work for 15 years, handed me a mop. "Bathroom 2 needs cleaning," she said without ceremony. For a man who'd spent 2 decades behind a pulpit, mopping a public bathroom felt surreal. But as I scrubbed toilets and wiped mirrors, I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Useful without being important. I was serving without an audience, helping without applause. It was humbling and holy at the same time. I met James during my second week. He was a regular at the shelter, mid-40s, weathered by life on the streets. We struck up a conversation over lunch. Chili and cornbread the shelter provided. "What did you do before this?" he asked me. I could have lied or deflected. I didn't. "I was a pastor," I said. "Big church. Thought I was doing God's work. Turned out I was mostly doing my own." He studied me. "What changed?" "I died," I said simply. "And Jesus showed me I'd been serving the wrong kingdom." James nodded slowly. "I left the church years ago," he said. "Too many people like the old you. Lots of talk, not much love." "You were right to leave," I said. "I'm sorry." Over the following months, I learned more about following Jesus from James and others like him than I'd learned in 22 years of professional ministry. They taught me about generosity when you have nothing, about faith when systems fail you, about community when society discards you. I started a Bible study at the shelter, not because anyone asked me to, but because a few guys expressed interest. We met Thursday nights, sitting on folding chairs in a cold room, reading scripture and talking honestly about our struggles. No performance, no polish, just broken men seeking God together. It was the most real church I'd ever experienced. Invitations started coming to speak about my experience. Churches, conferences, podcasts. Everyone wanted to hear about the pastor who died and came back with a warning. I turned most of them down. The ones I accepted I did without pay, making it clear I wasn't building a new platform. I shared my story simply. I'd been building my own kingdom while using Jesus' name. He'd shown me that millions of Christians are in the same danger. Loving ministry more than they love Him. Serving success more than serving people. The sin isn't external wickedness. It's internal idolatry. It's making God a means to an end rather than the end itself. Some people received the message with tears and repentance. Others got defensive, insisting that their ministries were different, that their success was truly from God. I didn't argue. I just told my story and let the Holy Spirit do the convicting. One pastor approached me after I spoke at a small church in Tucson. "I see myself in you," he said, his voice breaking. "I've been measuring my worth by attendance and giving. I've been too busy building to love my wife. I don't even know my kids anymore." "Then stop," I said gently. "The best time to turn around was yesterday. The second best time is now." 6 months after my resignation, Covenant called and asked if I'd come speak to the congregation one Sunday. The church had been through a rough transition. They'd hired an interim pastor, but attendance had continued to drop. People were confused, divided, hurting. I agreed, but only on one condition. I wouldn't preach. I'd sit in the congregation and then share for 5 minutes at the end. That Sunday, Jennifer and I walked into Covenant for the first time since I'd resigned. It felt surreal, sitting in the pews I used to look out at from the stage, singing songs I used to introduce, hearing a sermon I wasn't responsible for. The interim pastor was good, better than me actually, because he preached with a tenderness I'd lost years ago. After the sermon, he invited me to the front. I stood facing people I'd led for over 2 decades, and I told them the truth again. "I'm sorry," I said, "for building a machine instead of a family, for prioritizing growth over depth, for teaching you to perform instead of showing you how to love. I don't want Covenant to shrink, but I don't want you to grow just to grow. I want you to know Jesus, really know him, and that starts by admitting when we don't." There were tears, there was some anger, but mostly there was relief. Relief that someone had finally said out loud what many had felt but couldn't name. After the service, dozens of people came to me, not to thank me for great sermons, but to confess their own struggles with performance, with appearances, with loving success more than they loved God. We prayed together, cried together, and began the slow work of becoming real. A year after my death and resurrection, I stood in a very different place than where I'd been. No pulpit, no spotlight, no stage. Just a folding table at the Phoenix Hope Center, serving lunch to men and women society had forgotten, and I'd never felt closer to Jesus. Jennifer joined me at the shelter twice a week. We served side by side, washing dishes, sorting donations, listening to stories. Our marriage had been reborn through the process of losing everything we thought mattered. We'd learned to talk again, to laugh again, to pray together without performing. Nathan had started coming to the Thursday night Bible study. He was wrestling with his own faith, asking hard questions, and I was finally giving him space to doubt instead of pressuring him to believe. Bethany was in counseling, working through the damage of growing up in a performance-based faith environment. It was painful to watch, knowing I'd contributed to it, but healing was happening. The warning Jesus gave me has become my message, though I share it differently now. Not from platforms, but in conversations. Not in polished sermons, but in honest confessions. The sin that's sending millions of Christians to hell every hour isn't the obvious ones we preach against. It's the subtle, respectable sin of loving ministry more than we love Jesus, of serving our own kingdoms while using his name, of building impressive things for God without ever truly knowing God. Here's what I've learned. You can preach the gospel and not live it. You can lead people to Jesus while walking away from him yourself. You can build a successful ministry and lose your soul in the process. Jesus said it clearly. Not everyone who says to me, "Lord, Lord," will enter the kingdom of heaven, but only the one who does the will of my Father who is in heaven. Many will say on that day, "Lord, didn't we prophesy in your name? Didn't we drive out demons and perform miracles?" And he'll say, "I never knew you." The key word is knew, not knew about, not served in the name of, but knew, intimacy, relationship, abiding. I'd spent 22 years knowing about Jesus without knowing Jesus. And millions of Christians are making the same mistake right now. They're attending church faithfully, serving in ministries, reading their Bibles, praying, and all of it is done from a distance, without the intimacy that transforms. They're performing faith instead of living it. The hardest truth I had to accept is that success in ministry doesn't equal faithfulness to Jesus. I'd measured my worth by attendance, giving, baptisms, and programs. Jesus measured it by love for him and love for people. And by that measure, I'd been failing for years. Dr. Ramirez, our counselor, said something that stuck with me. "Michael, you were so busy working for Jesus that you forgot to be with Jesus. And with is where transformation happens." He was right. I'd become an expert at talking about Jesus, teaching about Jesus, defending Jesus, building things for Jesus. But I'd stopped sitting with Jesus, stopped listening to Jesus, stopped letting Jesus shape me from the inside out. I'd replaced intimacy with activity. And activity is a poor substitute for presence. There's a question I ask myself every morning now. Am I serving Jesus today, or am I serving my need to be significant? It's a painful question because the answer isn't always what I want it to be. Some mornings I catch myself strategizing about how to build influence again, how to grow a new platform, how to be important in a different way, and I have to stop, confess, and surrender that desire again. James, my friend from the shelter, asked me recently, "Do you miss it? The big church, the crowds, the respect?" I thought about it honestly. I miss the rush, I admitted. The feeling of being needed, being important, But I don't miss the emptiness. I don't miss the performance. I don't miss being separated from Jesus while using his name. He nodded. Sounds like you're becoming free. He was right. Freedom doesn't feel like success. It feels like surrender. It feels like smallness. It feels like loving people nobody applauds you for loving. It feels like serving without recognition. And in that smallness, I'm finally finding the Jesus I'd been talking about for decades, but never really knew. If you're watching this, and you're a pastor, a ministry leader, a faithful church volunteer, I want you to hear me. Check your heart. Are you serving Jesus or are you serving success in his name? Are you building his kingdom or yours? Are you loving people or using them to build your platform? These are hard questions, and you might not like the answers. I didn't, but asking them might save your soul. And if you're someone who's been hurt by leaders like the old me, people who built impressive ministries but failed to love you well, I'm sorry. On behalf of all of us who got it wrong, I'm sorry. You deserved shepherds who saw you as sheep to love, not numbers to count. You deserved leaders who prioritized your soul over their success. I hope you'll find healing, and I hope you won't let our failures keep you from Jesus. We failed you. He never will. The mystery Jesus revealed to me is this: hell isn't only for people who reject him. It's also for people who use him, people who build ministries without intimacy, people who preach grace but live by performance, people who know the Bible but don't know the author, people who lead others to Jesus while walking away from him themselves. And the scariest part is that these people, we, don't realize it until it's too late, because the sin is so subtle, so respectable, so celebrated in Christian culture. Success in ministry doesn't mean you're right with God. It might mean the opposite. Jesus didn't call us to build impressive things. He called us to know him and make him known. And you can't make him known if you don't know him yourself. I'm 52 now, working at a homeless shelter, living in a much smaller house, driving an older car. My kids are healing. My wife has her husband back. I'm no longer famous or influential or respected in the way I used to be. And I've never been more at peace, because I finally know Jesus. Not just know about him, know him. And that's worth more than everything I lost. If this message has wrecked you, if you're realizing you've been building your own kingdom while using his name, don't waste another day. Stop, confess, surrender. It will cost you. It might cost you everything, but what you gain is worth infinitely more than what you lose. You gain Jesus, the real Jesus, not the Jesus who blesses your plans, but the Jesus who becomes your plan, not the Jesus who serves your kingdom, but the Jesus whose kingdom you serve. Not the Jesus you use, but the Jesus who uses you. Subscribe to this channel if you want to hear more stories like mine. Stories of people who thought they had it all figured out and discovered they didn't. Stories of death and resurrection, of loss and finding, of ministry and intimacy. Share this with someone who needs to hear it. A pastor, a ministry leader, a faithful volunteer, someone who's busy building but might be missing Jesus in the process. And thank you for listening. Thank you for caring. Thank you for being willing to ask the hard questions. May you know Jesus, really know him, and may that knowing transform everything.